Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Hello, my name is Ezra Blackwood and I'm 47 years old. I currently live in Vermont, but I found your YouTube channel recently and decided to finally tell what happened to me when I worked in Washington State. This was 18 years ago, when I still worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington. What I'm going to tell you is the reason why I left that job, moved to Vermont, and could never go back to a forest alone again. I had been working there for only 8 months when Iris Kellerman's case happened. What started as a routine search and rescue procedure turned into the worst nightmare of my life. To this day, 18 years later, here in Vermont, I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing those voices. Sorry if my voice shakes at some moments. This is the first time I'm telling this completely to someone outside of therapy. My wife thinks I should keep this to myself, but you who follow real stories deserve to know that there are things out there. Things that people like me should protect you from, but sometimes we can't. I was new to the job, just 8 months, still trying to prove I deserved to be there. The Pacific Northwest forests are nothing like these Vermont woods where I live now. Out here, you can see through the trees. There's space to breathe. But those Olympic forests, they're ancient, dense with canopies so thick that 3 p.m. feels like twilight. The air itself feels heavier there, loaded with moisture from the Pacific that creates this constant mist hanging between the moss-covered trunks. Everything started normal on October 15, 2007. Iris Kellerman, a 34-year-old nature photographer from Portland, hadn't checked in from her solo camping trip. She was supposed to return 2 days earlier. Her sister called it in when Iris missed their Sunday dinner. Apparently that was sacred family time, never missed. I remember feeling that rookie anxiety when Supervisor Reynolds assigned me to lead the initial search. 8 months on the job, and I was desperate to prove I could handle something serious. Looking back, that desperation almost got us all killed. Iris had permits for the Hoh River area, about 15 miles into the backcountry. Beautiful area in autumn, the maples turning fire red against those massive Sitka spruces, some over 300 feet tall. But it's easy to get turned around in there. The trails aren't like these Vermont hiking paths that go straight up mountains. In Olympic, the paths wind around those ancient giants and fog rolls in from nowhere. I started the search with standard protocol, checking her planned route, looking for signs at known camping spots. Found her base camp around noon, and that's when I first felt something was wrong. Her tent was still up, perfectly arranged, sleeping bag laid out neat, camp stove clean, food properly stored in the bear canister. But her photography equipment was scattered. Not like a bear got to it. Bears don't carefully place a telephoto lens on a fallen log 20 feet from a camera body. And they definitely don't arrange film canisters in a neat line on a boulder. Someone had been through her stuff. Someone with hands. I radioed it into Reynolds. Possible theft at the campsite. Requesting backup for expanded search. Standard procedure. But when I tried to call again an hour later, I got nothing but static. That should have been my first real warning. In 2007, our radio equipment was basic but reliable in most of the park. Dead zones existed, sure, but I knew this area. I'd gotten clear reception from this exact spot a dozen times during training. I found Iris's trail heading northwest away from the marked paths. Her footprints were clear in the soft forest floor. Size 7 hiking boots, distinctive tread pattern. But about a quarter mile out, something made my stomach turn. There were other footprints following hers. Men's boots, size 11 or 12, with aggressive tread like military surplus. The stride pattern showed someone deliberately stepping in her tracks, trying to match her pace. Not the random overlap you'd expect from different hikers using the same trail. Someone had been stalking her. I should have gone back for backup right then. That's what a veteran ranger would have done. But I was 8 months new, trying to prove I could handle a real case. I was terrified Reynolds would think I couldn't cut it, so I followed the trail deeper into the forest. The Olympic backcountry in October is eerily quiet. Most birds have migrated and the big mammals are preparing for winter. But this was different. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, absorbed by the thick moss that carpets everything. About 2 miles in, I found her camera. It was hanging from a branch about 8 feet up like someone had thrown it there. The lens was cracked, but when I got it down and checked the film, my hands started shaking. The last few shots showed someone watching her camp from the tree line. Just a shadow at first, barely visible. But in the final photo, you could make out a bearded face, pale eyes staring directly at the camera, like he wanted her to know he was there. That's when I heard the first voice. Ezra. Soft, like a whisper carried on the wind. My name, clear as day, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. I froze, listening. But there was only that unnatural silence. "Hello?" I called back. Nothing. I told myself it was wind in the trees, or maybe another search party had arrived, but we were miles from any trail, and I hadn't heard any vehicles. Plus, nobody knew exactly where I was. My radio was still getting nothing but static. I kept following the tracks, but they were getting weird. Sometimes Iris's prints would stop mid-stride like she'd just vanished. Then they'd pick up again 20 feet away, in a completely different direction. The stalker's prints did the same thing. Around 4 p.m., the fog started rolling in thick from the coast. In Vermont, fog is just fog. But Pacific Northwest fog is different. It moves like it's alive, creeping between those massive tree trunks until you can barely see 10 feet ahead. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. That's when I found the first campsite. Not Iris's official camp, but a hidden site about 50 yards off any recognizable trail. Military-style lean-to shelter, camouflaged so well I almost walked past it. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. But what made my blood freeze were the photographs. Dozens of them pinned to trees around the shelter. Not just Iris. Women hikers, campers, backpackers. All taken from a distance, all without their knowledge. Some photos were weeks old based on the autumn foliage. Others looked recent. At the center of it all was a camping chair with clear sight lines in 3 directions. Perfect hunting blind. I was looking at a predator's den. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work my radio. Still nothing but static with occasional bursts of what sounded like voices, but too distorted to understand. Ezra, help us. The voice again, clearer this time. Definitely female, but not any voice I recognized. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I drew my sidearm, a .40 Smith & Wesson that suddenly felt inadequate against the feeling of being watched from every shadow. Ezra, please. Multiple voices now overlapping, all calling my name. I spun around trying to locate the source, but the fog was too thick. The voices seemed to move, circling me. That's when I realized I wasn't just looking for Iris anymore. I was being hunted. I got out of that clearing fast, but the voices followed me. Always just at the edge of hearing, calling my name, begging for help. Sometimes they sounded like children, sometimes like grown women. Once, I swear I heard my own mother's voice, even though she'd been dead for 3 years. The worst part was my equipment. My compass started spinning wildly like there was some massive magnetic field. My GPS kept showing impossible coordinates, sometimes placing me in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sometimes showing me in Canada. But I kept following those tracks, because somewhere out there, Iris was still alive. Had to be. The terrain started getting strange around sunset. I'd been in this section of the park during training, knew it like the back of my hand. But trails I'd hiked a dozen times seemed to lead to places I'd never seen. A creek that should have flowed north was running uphill. A distinctive rock formation that marked the eastern boundary appeared to my west. In Vermont, you can navigate by the mountains. The Green Mountains run north-south, give you your bearings. But in that fog, with my instruments going crazy, I might as well have been on another planet. Then I found Iris's backpack. It was hanging from a branch 12 feet up, contents scattered below like someone had shaken it out. But what made my skin crawl was how it was arranged. Personal items, underwear, toiletries, journal, laid out in a neat spiral pattern around the base of the tree. Someone was playing games. I gathered what I could, stuffing items back into the pack when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Fresh boot prints in the soft earth, but not just the stalker's prints from before. These were smaller. Size 7, Iris's boots. But they were walking alongside the bigger prints now, not being followed. Like she was cooperating. That's because she's smart. I spun around, weapon drawn, and found myself face to face with him. He was about 40, maybe 6'2", with a military bearing and pale eyes that seemed to catch what little light filtered through the fog. Woodland camouflage that was actually effective. I could barely make him out even at 10 feet. "You're trespassing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, and I noticed his teeth were stained yellow from tobacco. Funny thing about trespassing, Ranger. This was all Maca territory once. Your government's the real trespasser. Where is Iris Kellerman? Safe. For now. He took a step closer, hands visible but relaxed. Combat stance without looking threatening. Name's Marcus Thorne. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan before they decided I wasn't fit for civilized society anymore. Step back and keep your hands where I can see them. He laughed. Relax, Boy Scout. If I wanted you dead, you'd have been dead an hour ago when you were fumbling around my camp taking pictures. My blood went cold. He'd been watching me. See, I like games, Thorne continued. Your little photographer friend, she's been providing excellent sport for the past 3 days. Smart girl. She figured out the rules quick. What rules? Hide and seek. I give her a head start, she tries to get away. When I catch her, we start over. His smile widened. She's gotten good at it. Almost made it to the ranger station yesterday before I found her. The ranger station was 8 miles from here. If Iris had made it that far. Problem is, Thorne said, game's getting boring. Time for new players. That's when I heard Iris scream. It came from somewhere south of us, maybe half a mile away. High, terrified, cutting through the fog like a knife. I started running before I could think, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound. Behind me, I could hear Thorne laughing. That's the spirit, Ranger. Game on. The fog seemed to thicken as I ran, branches appearing out of nowhere to tear at my uniform. I kept my weapon drawn, following the echoes of that scream, but the sound seemed to bounce off the trees in impossible ways. Another scream, this time from a completely different direction. I stopped, lungs burning, trying to get my bearings. That's when I realized the voices had started again. Ezra, help me. But this time it was Iris's voice, coming from 3 different directions at once. Over here, Ezra. Please, I'm hurt. He's going to kill me. I spun around, weapon ready, but there was nothing but fog and those massive tree trunks disappearing into the gray. Thorne's laughter echoed from somewhere above me. Impossible unless he'd climbed one of those giants. She's good at mimicry, his voice called down. Spent 2 days teaching her how to throw her voice, military technique, useful for confusing the enemy. But that didn't make sense. The voices were coming from too many places, and some of them... Some of them didn't sound quite like Iris anymore. Ezra, why did you leave us here? That voice was different, older, and it was coming from behind me. I turned and saw her, a woman in hiking gear, maybe 50 years old, standing just at the edge of visibility in the fog. But something was wrong with the way she stood, too still, like she was floating just off the ground. Ma'am, I called out, are you injured? She tilted her head at an angle that made my neck hurt to look at. We've been waiting so long, Ezra. Why didn't you come sooner? My radio crackled to life suddenly, making me jump. But instead of dispatch, I heard voices. Dozens of them, all talking at once, all saying my name. The woman in the fog smiled, and her teeth were black. Then she was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, weapon drawn, staring at empty fog. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Time seemed broken in that place. When I finally started moving again, my GPS was showing coordinates that placed me in the middle of the Olympic Mountains, about 50 miles from where I'd started. But I could still hear traffic from Highway 101, maybe 2 miles away. I followed the sound, trying to get back to some kind of reality when I found the cave. It was hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss, opening in the base of a massive cedar that had to be centuries old. I wouldn't have seen it if not for the faint glow coming from inside. Flashlight beam. Someone was in there. Iris, I called softly. Ezra. Her voice, real this time, weak, but definitely her. Oh God, please tell me you're real. I pushed through the moss and found her huddled in the back of the natural hollow, wrapped in a space blanket. She was alive, but barely. Dehydrated, hypothermic, with cuts and bruises covering her arms. I'm real, I said, holstering my weapon and moving toward her. I'm Ranger Blackwood, we're getting you out of here. She started crying when I wrapped my jacket around her. He said no one would come, that this was his forest now. How long have you been here? I don't know. Days. He keeps letting me go and then catching me again. Says it's more fun when I run. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. But there's something else out there, Ezra. Something worse than him. What do you mean? The voices? They started the second night. Other people calling for help. But when I tried to find them, she shuddered. They weren't people anymore. A branch snapped outside the cave. I drew my weapon, motioning for Iris to stay quiet. Heavy footsteps circled the entrance, deliberate, taking their time. Time's up, Ranger. Thorne's voice, calm and conversational. Bring her out, and maybe I'll make it quick for you. I helped Iris to her feet, supporting her weight. She was weaker than I'd thought, probably hadn't eaten in days. There's another way out, she whispered. Back of the cave. It's tight, but it leads to a ravine. We moved deeper into the hollow, my flashlight beam revealing a narrow crack in the rock face. Big enough to crawl through, maybe. I can hear you moving around in there, Thorne called. You're just making this harder on yourselves. That's when the voices started again. Ezra, don't leave us. We're so cold out here. Please, we need help. But this time they were coming from inside the cave with us. Iris grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. That's them, she whispered. That's what I've been hearing. The voices were getting closer, echoing off the stone walls. My flashlight beam swept the cave, but we were alone. He did something to them, Iris continued, her voice barely audible. The other missing people. He told me about them, bragged about his collection. But they're still here somehow, still calling. A woman's voice right next to my ear. Why won't you help us, Ezra? I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through empty air. That's when I understood. Thorne wasn't just a predator. He was something worse. Or maybe he was working with something worse. Move, I told Iris, pushing her toward the crack in the rock. Now. We squeezed through the opening just as Thorne appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the fog. But he wasn't alone. I could see shapes moving behind him in the mist, too tall, too thin, moving in ways that hurt to watch. The crack led to a narrow ravine, maybe 20 feet deep, with a stream at the bottom. We half fell, half climbed down the rocky walls, Iris weakening with every step. Above us, I could hear Thorne laughing. You can't run from what lives in these woods, Ranger. It's been here longer than your government, longer than the tribes that named it. But we kept moving, following the stream as it wound through the ravine. My radio crackled occasionally with those impossible voices, sometimes in English, sometimes in languages I didn't recognize. We'd been moving for maybe an hour when Iris collapsed. "I can't," she gasped. "I'm sorry, I just can't." I checked my GPS again. Still showing impossible coordinates, but the stream had to lead somewhere. Water always finds the ocean. That's when I heard the helicopter. Faint at first, but definitely a chopper getting closer. I fired 3 shots in the air, the universal distress signal, and started my emergency strobe. "Coast Guard search and rescue," wire came the voice over my radio, finally clear. "This is Eagle 1. We have your signal, Ranger Blackwood." "Are you with the missing person?" "Affirmative," I replied, supporting Iris as she tried to stand. "One survivor needs immediate medical attention." But as the helicopter noise got closer, Thorne's voice echoed down the ravine. "This isn't over, Ranger. You can take her, but the others stay with me. They're mine now." And then, impossibly, I heard them. Dozens of voices, calling out from the forest above us. Men, women, children, all begging for help, all using my name. The helicopter crew pulled us up in a rescue basket, and as we rose above the forest canopy, I looked down and saw them. Figures standing in the clearings looking up at us. Too many to count, all perfectly still. But in my peripheral vision, they seemed to be waving. The official report said we found Iris Kellerman suffering from exposure and dehydration after being lost for 4 days. No mention of Marcus Thorne. No mention of the photographs. When investigators went back to the coordinates I gave them, they found nothing. No camp, no shelter, no signs of human habitation. Iris recovered physically, but she never talked about what happened. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona, desert country, where you can see for miles in every direction. They offered me a transfer to another park, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't go back into any forest, anywhere. The voices followed me for months afterward, calling my name in empty places. My apartment in Port Angeles, the grocery store, even here in Vermont when I first moved. My therapist says it was trauma response, auditory hallucinations brought on by extreme stress. Maybe she's right. The voices have faded over the years, especially since I moved to these Vermont woods where everything is different. Cleaner somehow. Less history. But sometimes, on foggy October nights when the temperature drops and the forest goes quiet, I still hear them. And I know Marcus Thorne is still out there. The FBI never found any trace of him, but they did find something interesting when they finally took my story seriously enough to investigate. 17 people have gone missing in Olympic National Park over the past 20 years. 17. Most were solo hikers, photographers, people who went into the backcountry alone. The official cause is always the same: lost, exposure, presumed dead. Bodies never recovered. But I know better. I know they're still out there, calling for help in voices that get clearer every year. And I know that something in those ancient forests has been collecting them, keeping them, using them. Maybe it's human evil. Maybe it's something older. Maybe it's both, working together in ways that make the darkness deeper than it should be. All I know is that I'll never go back to find out. If you're planning to visit Olympic National Park, please don't go alone. Don't camp in the backcountry. And if you hear voices calling your name from the forest, don't answer, because some things are better left lost in the woods. And if you see a bearded man in woodland camouflage watching you from the tree line, don't wait to see what game he wants to play. Just run. Recording ends. Hello, my name is Brian Donovan and I'm 29 years old. I currently live in Maine, but I found your YouTube channel recently and decided to finally tell what happened to me when I worked in Washington State. This was 6 years ago, when I still worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington. What I'm going to tell you is the reason why I left that job, moved to Maine, and could never go back to a forest alone again. I had been working there for 8 months when Kaya Thorne's case happened. What started as a routine search and rescue procedure turned into the worst nightmare of my life. To this day, 6 years later, here in Maine, I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing those sounds. Sorry if my voice shakes at some moments. This is the first time I'm telling this completely to someone outside of therapy. My wife thinks I should keep this to myself, but you who follow real stories deserve to know that there are things out there, things that people like me should protect you from, but sometimes we can't. I was new to the job, just 8 months, still trying to prove I deserve to be there. Olympic National Park isn't like the forests here in Maine. The temperate rainforest there is something else entirely. Ancient trees so massive they block out the sky, creating a perpetual twilight even during the day. The air is thick with moisture, everything drips constantly, and sounds carry in ways that don't make sense. In Maine, you can hear clearly for miles. In Olympic, whispers can sound like they're right next to you when they're coming from half a mile away. Everything started normal on October 15th, 2019. Kaya Thorne was a 22-year-old marine biology graduate student from the University of Washington. She'd been conducting research on coastal ecosystems where the temperate rainforest meets the Pacific Ocean, specifically studying how the massive root systems of old-growth trees affect tidal pool environments. She was supposed to check in every 48 hours via satellite phone. When 72 hours passed without contact, her research advisor called it in. I remember being excited when my supervisor, Ranger Martinez, assigned me to lead the search. This was my chance to prove myself, to show I could handle serious responsibility. God, I was so naive. I thought my training meant something out there. Kaya was last seen at the Hoh River Visitor Center on October 12th around 3 p.m. She told the staff she was heading to a remote section of coastline about 12 miles north. accessible only by a difficult trail that wound through some of the densest parts of the rainforest. The plan was for her to camp for 3 nights, taking water and soil samples, photographing root systems, and documenting how the forest ecosystem transitioned into marine environment. I started the search at dawn on October 16th. The autumn weather in Washington is brutal. Constant drizzle, temperatures dropping into the 40s, and darkness falling by 5 p.m. Nothing like the crisp, clear autumns here in Maine, where you can actually see the sky. Out there, the canopy is so thick that you're basically walking through a green tunnel, and when the fog rolls in from the Pacific, visibility drops to maybe 10 feet. I hiked the main trail with my partner, Ranger Chen, following Kaya's planned route. Everything seemed normal for the first 6 miles. We found evidence she'd passed through: a granola bar wrapper properly disposed of in her pack, a clear boot print in mud that matched her hiking boots. The trail was well marked and I was feeling confident. Too confident. That's when we found her first campsite, about 8 miles in. Her tent was set up properly, research equipment organized, but something felt wrong. Her sleeping bag was laid out like she'd been planning to sleep, but there were no signs she'd actually spent the night. No food remnants, no indication the camp stove had been used, and her satellite phone was sitting on a rock, fully charged, with 17 missed calls from her research advisor. Chen radioed back to base while I examined the campsite more carefully. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Her footprints led away from the camp in 3 different directions. Not like she'd walked around the area. I mean 3 distinct trails leading into the forest, as if she'd left camp 3 separate times in 3 different directions, wearing the same boots. I'm trained to look for logical explanations. Maybe she'd returned to camp multiple times. But there were no returning footprints. Each trail just went into the forest and didn't come back. And the prints in each direction showed the same wear pattern on the left heel, the same pressure distribution. Identical in a way that didn't make sense unless she'd somehow walked 3 different paths simultaneously. Chen finished his radio call and came over to look. "GPS malfunction," he said, pointing to the device clipped to her pack. The screen was lit up, but it was showing our location as 3 different places at once. The coordinates kept shifting, sometimes showing we were at the campsite, sometimes 2 miles north, sometimes in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. "Equipment failure," I said, trying to convince myself. "The moisture out here plays hell with electronics." But Chen was staring at something else. "Brian," he said quietly, "look at this." He was pointing at her research journal, left open to the last entry. Kaya's handwriting, but the words made no sense. "The trees are watching. Same grove, different times. I keep ending up back here, but the sun is in different positions." The voice that sounds like my mother keeps calling from the North Trail. She's been dead for 3 years. The man in the ghillie suit hasn't moved from behind the big cedar for 6 hours. I don't think he's breathing. Below that, in the same handwriting but shakier, time is 6:23 p.m., time is 2:17 p.m., time is 6:23 p.m. The watch won't stop doing this. I can hear myself calling for help, but I'm not calling for help. Brian Donovan will come looking. Tell him not to follow the North Trail. Tell him the Watcher feeds on fear and the forest feeds on time. I stared at the journal entry, my hands shaking. How did she know my name? I'd never met Kaya Thorne. I'd only been assigned to her case that morning. There was no way she could have known I'd be the one searching for her. Chen, I said, but when I looked up, he was gone. I spun around, calling his name. No answer. His footprints just stopped, about 3 feet from where he'd been standing, like he'd vanished mid-step. My radio crackled with static, and then I heard Chen's voice, distant and distorted. Brian, where are you? I'm at the campsite, but you're not here. I'm right here, I radioed back. Where are you? I'm looking at Kaya's tent. There's no one here. Brian, how long have you been gone? I looked at my watch, 6:23 p.m., but that was impossible. We'd arrived at the campsite around 2 p.m., spent maybe 20 minutes examining it. The sun was still visible through the canopy, nowhere near sunset position. Chen, it's still afternoon, it's barely past 2 p.m. Brian, it's past 6, it's almost dark. I'm calling for backup. I looked at my watch again. 2:17 p.m., then 6:23 p.m., then 2:17 p.m. The hands were moving back and forth like something was playing with time itself. That's when I heard the voice. Help me. Distant female coming from the North Trail. Kaya's voice, I was sure of it. Please, someone help me. Every instinct told me to follow the sound, but I kept staring at that journal entry. Tell him not to follow the North Trail. How could she have known? I grabbed my pack and started toward the North Trail anyway. I had to find her. That's what I was there for, that's what I'd trained for. But as I reached the trailhead, I noticed something that made me freeze. Fresh boot prints in the mud. My boot prints. Size 11 Merrell hiking boots with the distinctive tread pattern, and the small cut on the left sole where I'd stepped on a sharp rock during training. But I hadn't walked this trail. I was seeing my own footprints leading into the forest, and I had no memory of making them. The voice called again, closer now. Brian, help me, I'm hurt. She knew my name. That should have been impossible, but there it was, echoing through the trees. And underneath her voice, barely audible, I heard something else. A low chuckle, definitely male, like someone was enjoying a private joke. I started following the trail, my footprints leading the way like breadcrumbs. The forest grew denser, the massive cedars and Douglas firs creating a canopy so thick that it felt like walking through a tunnel. The constant dripping of moisture from the leaves created a rhythm that sounded almost like whispers. In Maine, forests are quiet. In Olympic, the forest never stops talking. About half a mile down the trail, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A makeshift shelter, expertly camouflaged between 2 massive cedar trees. Military-style construction, using natural materials and a ghillie suit draped over the frame to break up the outline. Inside, I could see sleeping gear, canned food, and something that made my blood freeze. Photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to a makeshift board. Pictures of hikers, campers, people I didn't recognize. But also pictures of park rangers, pictures of Chen, pictures of me, taken with a telephoto lens from distances that suggested the photographer had been watching us for days, maybe weeks. In the center of the board was a photo of Kaya Thorne, but it wasn't from her university ID or social media. It was recent, taken in the forest. She was looking over her shoulder, fear clear on her face, like she knew she was being hunted. Below the photos, carved into the wooden frame, were words: "The watcher feeds, the forest provides, time is the cage. You found my gallery." The voice came from directly behind me. Male, calm, with the controlled tone of someone accustomed to command. I spun around, hand going to my radio, but there was no one there, just trees and shadows and the endless dripping of moisture. "She's still alive," the voice continued, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "For now." But the forest is hungry, and I've learned to feed it what it wants. Fear creates temporal echoes. The more terrified they become, the more the forest feeds, the more time loops and bends. I keyed my radio. "This is Ranger Donovan. I found evidence of a hostile presence in Sector 7, requesting immediate backup." Static. Then Chen's voice. "Brian, where are you? I've been calling for 20 minutes. You never answered about the campsite." "Chen, I'm following the North Trail." "There's someone out here, someone who's been watching us. He has photos." "Brian, you're not making sense. What North Trail? You're supposed to be heading back to base. It's getting dark." I looked around. I was standing in Kaya's campsite again. The shelter I'd found, the photographs, the carved message, all gone, like they'd never existed. My watch read 6:23 p.m., then 2:17 p.m., then 6:23 p.m. "The forest feeds on fear," Kaya's voice whispered from somewhere in the trees. "And he's been feeding it for years." That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just a missing person case. This wasn't even just a predator using the forest as hunting ground. Something in Olympic National Park was actively helping him, feeding off the terror he created, bending time and space to trap his victims in loops of fear and confusion. I started running. The trail back to the main path should have taken 15 minutes. I ran for what felt like hours, but I kept ending up back at Kaya's campsite. The same tent, the same research equipment, the same journal entry warning me about myself. But each time I returned, something was different. Sometimes Chen was there, sometimes he wasn't. Sometimes it was daylight, sometimes approaching dusk. Sometimes my own footprints were leading away from the camp, sometimes they were leading toward it. On the 7th loop, and yes, I was counting by then, I found Kaya. She was sitting by her tent, alive but wrong. Her eyes were unfocused, staring at nothing, and she was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. "I already told you," she was saying to the empty air. "The samples are in the blue containers. Yes, I know you've been watching. No, I won't try to run again." "Kaya," I called out, approaching slowly. "It's okay. I'm Ranger Donovan. I'm here to help." She turned to look at me, and her face showed no recognition, no relief. Just a flat, exhausted acceptance. "You're early this time," she said. "Usually you don't show up until after the screaming starts." "What do you mean this time?" "This is the 43rd loop," she said matter-of-factly. "Or maybe the 44th. I stopped counting after 30. He likes to watch you figure it out over and over. The fear is fresher each time for you, even though you're starting to remember. And she was right. Now that she'd said it, I could feel the memories bleeding through. Fragments of previous loops, finding the shelter, hearing the watcher's voice, running back to camp, finding Kaya in different states, sometimes terrified, sometimes catatonic, sometimes missing entirely. How do we get out? I asked. We don't, she said. That's what I figured out around Loop 20. This part of the forest, it's like a trap. He's been feeding it fear for years, and now it's powerful enough to hold time and place. We just keep living the same few hours over and over, and each time we get more afraid, it gets stronger. There has to be a way. Maybe, she said. But it would require one of us to stop being afraid. Really stop. And that's hard to do when you know what's coming. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy boots, moving with military precision through the undergrowth. The watcher was coming, right on schedule. He'll be here in 2 minutes, Kaya said. He likes to talk first, tells us how smart he is, how he discovered the forest's hunger, how he's learned to work with it instead of against it. Then he'll start the hunt. The footsteps stopped just outside the clearing. I could feel eyes on us, that prickly sensation of being watched by a predator who's evaluating his prey. Ranger Donovan. The voice was calm, professional. You're learning faster this time. Usually takes you until Loop 50 to start remembering. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there, probably in full ghillie suit, invisible among the trees. What do you want? I called out. Nothing you can give me, he replied. I already have everything I need. The forest provides, and I provide for the forest. A symbiotic relationship. You and Miss Thorne are just renewable resources. You're insane. Am I? I've been hunting in these woods for 8 years, Ranger Donovan. Started with animals, moved on to more challenging prey. But the real breakthrough came 3 years ago when I realized the forest was responding to the fear. Time would slow down during the hunt, extend the experience. The more terror I could generate, the longer the moments lasted. I was scanning the tree line, trying to spot him, hand on my sidearm. But Kaya grabbed my wrist. Don't, she whispered. That's what he wants. The fear of violence, the adrenaline of the chase. It feeds the loop. Then gradually, the watcher continued, I learned to create stable temporal pockets, areas where time moves in circles instead of forward. Perfect hunting preserves where the prey never escapes, never truly dies, just provides endless fear. You're a monster. I'm an evolutionary step, he said. I've learned to work with forces that most people can't even perceive. The indigenous peoples who lived here before us, they knew about places like this. Thin spots where the normal rules don't apply. They avoided this grove, called it the place where spirits eat time. A branch snapped to my left, then my right. He was moving, circling us, but I couldn't see him. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to run, both of you. I'll give you a 2-minute head start, just like always. You'll try to escape. get turned around, end up back here terrified and exhausted. The fear will feed the forest will reset the loop, and we'll do it all again. Forever. And if we don't run, then I'll make you run. That's when Kaya stood up and did something that changed everything. She laughed. Not hysterical laughter, not the laugh of someone who'd snapped under pressure. Clear, genuine amusement. "You know what's funny?" she said, loud enough for the watcher to hear. "You think you're controlling this, but you're as trapped as we are." The forest went completely silent. Even the constant dripping stopped. "What are you talking about?" The watcher's voice had lost some of its calm confidence. "When was the last time you left these woods?" Akaya asked. "Really left? Not just moved to a different sector, but actually went home, slept in a real bed, had a conversation with another human being?" Silence. "You can't, can you?" she continued. "The forest won't let you. You've fed it so much fear that you've become part of it. You're not a hunter anymore. You're just another ghost in the loop." I could hear movement in the trees, agitated now instead of controlled. "Shut up," the watcher said, but his voice sounded different, uncertain. "You want to know what I figured out around Loop 30? Kaya said. "You're not real anymore." "You're just an echo of yourself, playing out the same patterns over and over because that's all the forest knows how to do with you. The real you probably died years ago, consumed by the very thing you thought you were controlling." That's when he made his mistake. He came into the clearing. I'd been expecting some kind of elite operator, someone who looked like he could back up all the psychological warfare. What I saw was a man in his 50s, thin to the point of gauntness, wearing a ghillie suit that looked like it had grown into his skin. His eyes were wrong, not quite focused on the present, like he was seeing multiple time streams at once. "I am real," he said, but even as he spoke I could see through him. Literally. The trees behind him were visible through his body, like he was a badly tuned hologram. "No," Kaya said gently. "You're not. And neither is this conversation, really." "This is just what the forest remembers of you, playing on repeat because it doesn't know how to do anything else." The watcher raised what looked like a rifle, but when I blinked, it was a stick. Then a rifle again. His form kept shifting, unstable. "The fear," he said, his voice becoming distant. "The fear feeds..." "Nothing," Kaya finished. "The fear feeds nothing, because there's nothing left to feed, just patterns in the wood, echoes in the moss." And that's when I understood. The real breakthrough wasn't figuring out how to escape the loop. It was realizing we were already out of it. I looked at my watch. The hands had stopped moving entirely, frozen at 6:23 p.m. But for the first time in I don't know how many loops, the time wasn't changing. "Kaya," I said slowly, "how long have we actually been missing?" She pulled out her satellite phone, the one that had been sitting on the rock since we found her campsite. For the first time, it showed a clear signal. "17 missed calls, but the timestamp on the last one was October 19th, 3 days after we'd started the search." "We've been out here for 3 days," she said. "The loops, the time distortion, all of it happened in our heads. Psychological manipulation combined with hallucinogenic compounds and extreme sleep deprivation." I keyed my radio, and for the first time in subjective hours, I got a clear response. "Brian." Chen's voice came through crisp and clear. "Jesus, where have you been? We've had search teams combing the forest for 3 days. Your GPS went dark Tuesday night." "Chen, we're in Sector 7, about half a mile north of Kaya Thorne's campsite. We need immediate medical evacuation." "Copy that. Are you injured?" I looked at Kaya, who was staring at her hands like she was seeing them for the first time. "Unknown," I radioed back. "Possible drug exposure. And Chen? When you get here, you're going to find a camp." "Military-style shelter, surveillance equipment, chemical supplies, tag it as a crime scene." "Understood. Helicopter ETA 15 minutes. I should have felt relief, but something was still wrong. The watcher might have been mostly hallucination, but the camp I'd found was real. The photographs were real. And if he'd been drugging hikers and playing psychological games for years... "Kaya," I said, "in your research, did you find any reports of missing persons in this area? People who disappeared and were never found?" She nodded slowly. 17 people over the past 8 years. The Park Service attributed most of them to normal wilderness hazards, but the pattern was wrong. Too clustered around this specific area. And now we know why. When the helicopter arrived, the medics found us dehydrated, malnourished, and with traces of several psychoactive compounds in our blood. Scopolamine, LSD, and something they couldn't identify that the lab later determined was a synthetic compound designed to induce temporal disorientation and memory fragmentation. The crime scene team found the real camp about a quarter mile from where I thought I'd seen it. Harold Vess, 54, former Army Ranger with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a medical discharge for psychological trauma. He'd been living in the forest for 8 years, supporting himself by robbing hikers and occasionally taking more elaborate prey for his psychological experiments. They found journals documenting his work, step-by-step instructions for breaking down victims mentally before moving on to physical torture. 17 names matched the missing persons reports. Bodies were recovered from various locations throughout the park over the following months. Vess himself was found dead in his shelter, apparent suicide by gunshot. The timestamp on his final journal entry was October 16th, the day we'd started searching for Kaya. He'd written, "The forest is calling back its debts. Time to pay." But here's the thing that still bothers me, 6 years later. The thing that made me leave Washington and move all the way to Maine, as far from Olympic National Park as I could get. In those final journal entries, Vess wrote about us by name. Not just our names, but details about our conversation, word-for-word quotes from exchanges that happened during the hallucinations. Things he couldn't have known unless he was somehow experiencing the loops along with us. And in his final entry, he wrote, "The new ranger learns fast." 43 loops before breakthrough. The forest is disappointed. Donovan will carry the mark. He'll never be able to walk in deep woods again without feeling the watching. He was right about that last part. I lasted another 2 months in Washington before the nightmares and panic attacks made it impossible to do my job. Every time I walked into dense forest, I could feel time getting unstable around me. My watch would run slow, then fast. I'd hear voices calling from directions that led nowhere. I'd see my own footprints in mud I'd never walked through. The Park Service medically retired me with full benefits. Officially, I suffered psychological trauma from extended exposure to psychoactive drugs administered by a serial killer. Unofficially, they were relieved to see me go. Other rangers reported that equipment malfunctioned around me, that GPS units would give impossible readings when I was part of search teams. I moved to Maine because the forests here are different. Younger, thinner. The trees don't watch the same way, but I still can't go hiking alone. My wife thinks it's just PTSD, and maybe she's right. But sometimes when the wind is just right, and the shadows fall at a certain angle, I hear something calling my name from deep in the woods. And sometimes, I swear I can hear Kaya's voice, still trapped in that grove, still counting loops that might not have ever ended. The thing about time is that it's not as solid as we think. Push on it hard enough with enough fear and pain and human will, and it bends. Sometimes it breaks. And once it's broken in a place, I think it stays broken. That's why I'm telling this story. Because if you ever find yourself hiking in Olympic National Park, specifically in the Hoh River area, and you come across a grove where the trees seem too thick, where your watch starts acting strange, where you hear voices calling from multiple directions, don't follow them. Don't try to help, just leave. Because the watcher might be dead, but the forest remembers everything he taught it, and it's still hungry. Sometimes I think about going back. Not to the Grove, I'm not that crazy, but to Washington, to see if I could handle working in forests again. But then I remember the feeling of time moving in circles, of living the same fear over and over, and I know I'll never be that brave, or that stupid. The official report says that Harold Vest drugged 17 people to death over 8 years as part of elaborate psychological experiments. That's the truth that goes in the files, the truth that makes sense to people who've never felt time bend around them. But I know there was something else in those woods, something that existed in the spaces between seconds, feeding on fear and growing stronger with each victim. Vess might have started as the predator, but by the end, he was just another ghost in the machine, playing out patterns that something much older and hungrier had learned to love. And I think it's still out there, in that grove where spirits eat time waiting for the next person curious enough or unlucky enough to teach it new ways to feed. That's why I moved to Maine. That's why I can't sleep without medication. That's why I jump every time my watch runs slow. Because I know that somewhere in Olympic National Park, In a grove that exists slightly outside of normal time, something is still watching, still waiting, still hungry. And sometimes when the wind is right and I'm feeling particularly foolish, I almost want to go back and see if I can finally figure out what it really was. Almost. But not quite. Thank you for listening. I hope you never have reason to understand why this story needed to be told. Hello. My name is Enzo Blackwood and I'm 34 years old. I currently live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I found your YouTube channel recently and decided to finally tell what happened to me when I worked in Washington State. This was 6 years ago, when I still worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington. What I'm going to tell you is the reason why I left that job, moved to New Mexico, and could never go back to a forest alone again. I had been working there for 8 years when Thalia Morse's case happened. What started as a routine search and rescue procedure turned into the worst nightmare of my life. To this day, 6 years later, here in the desert where I can see for miles in every direction, I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing those voices calling my name from between trees that aren't there anymore. Sorry if my voice shakes at some moments. This is the first time I'm telling this completely to someone outside of therapy. My wife thinks I should keep this to myself, but you who follow real stories deserve to know that there are things out there, things that people like me should protect you from. But sometimes we can't. Sometimes we become the prey ourselves. Everything started normal on October 23rd, 2019. The autumn in Olympic was particularly dense that year, the kind of thick, wet autumn that makes the ancient rainforest feel like it's closing in around you. Here in New Mexico, autumn is dry and open, all golden light and endless sky. But in Washington, autumn meant early darkness at 5 p.m., fog so thick you could taste it, and the constant sound of water dripping from thousand-year-old trees. Thalia Morse had been reported missing by the University of Washington after she failed to check in from her research site. She was 28, a marine biologist studying the ecosystem interactions between old-growth forests and salmon streams. Smart woman, experienced hiker, but she was working alone in the Hoh River area, one of the most remote sections of the park. I remember the first thing that struck me as odd was her camp. We found it around 2 p.m. that first day, and it was too organized. Her tent was perfectly zipped, sleeping bag rolled with military precision, research equipment arranged in neat rows. But her boots were missing, and there was a cup of coffee on the camp table that was still lukewarm. She left in a hurry, said Derek Sawyer, my partner that day. Derek was good people, a 15-year veteran who knew every trail in Olympic like his own backyard. But why leave barefoot? That's when we found the first footprints. Barefoot impressions in the mud heading toward the deeper forest. But they were too deep, too deliberate. Like someone walking with purpose, not someone who'd lost their shoes and was stumbling around confused. The radio crackled. Base to Unit 7, over. Unit 7 here, go ahead, base. Weather Service is calling for heavy fog rolling in around 4 p.m. You boys better wrap up soon or wait until morning. Derek looked at the sky through the canopy. Copy that, base. We'll push for another hour. We followed the footprints for maybe half a mile when Derek stopped dead. Enzo, look at this. The footprints had changed. What started as normal human prints now showed extra toes, long, stretched impressions like someone with webbed feet. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that they were going in two directions, deeper into the forest and back toward camp, at the same time. Camera malfunction, Derek muttered, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Our standard documentation photos were coming out blurred, showing strange shadows that weren't there when we took them. That's when we heard it for the first time. A woman's voice, distant and echoing, calling, "Help me, please, someone help me." But it was coming from 3 different directions at once. Derek grabbed his radio. Base, we have potential contact with missing person. Following voice northwest of last known position. Static. Then, Unit 7. Did you say voice? We're not reading any bzzzt on your position. Base, please repeat. You're breaking up. Nothing but static. Derek looked at his radio, shook it, adjusted the frequency. Dead. Probably the fog, he said. But we both knew fog didn't kill radios like that. Not in October. Not when the weather was still clear. We followed the voice deeper into the forest. The old-growth section of Olympic is like walking through a cathedral built by giants. Douglas firs and Sitka spruces that were already ancient when Columbus landed. Here in New Mexico, the landscape is honest. You can see what's coming, what's hiding, what's real. But in that Washington forest, shadows moved independent of light, and sound bounced off trees in ways that defied physics. Help me. I'm so cold. Please. The voice was closer now, maybe 50 yards ahead. But Derek had stopped walking and was looking at his compass with a frown. Enzo, we've been walking northwest for 20 minutes. Yeah, so? My compass says we're heading southeast. I checked my GPS. Error message. Checked my backup compass. It was spinning slowly like it couldn't decide which way was north. Equipment failure, I said, but my mouth was dry. Magnetic anomaly. There's iron deposits in these mountains. Derek nodded, but he'd drawn his sidearm. Standard procedure when equipment starts failing in the wilderness was to assume the worst-case scenario, that someone was deliberately interfering with our gear. That's when we saw her. Thalia Morse was standing about 30 yards ahead, between 2 massive cedar trees. She was barefoot, wearing the same clothes described in her missing person report, but she was wrong. She stood too still, like a mannequin. Her head was tilted at an angle that made my neck hurt just looking at it. Ma'am, Derek called out. Thalia Morse, I'm Ranger Sawyer with Olympic National Park. Are you injured? She didn't respond, didn't move, didn't blink. We approached slowly, hands on our weapons but not drawn. 20 yards, 15, 10. At 5 yards I could see her eyes, they were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eyes, like someone had filled them with ink. "Derek," I whispered. "I see it." That's when she smiled. Her mouth opened too wide, showing teeth that went back too far, and she spoke in a voice that wasn't quite human. "Thank you for coming. He's been waiting for you." Derek drew his weapon. "Ma'am, I need you to—" She was gone. Not ran away, not disappeared behind a tree. Gone. Like she'd never been there. "What the hell?" Derek started to say, but then we heard clapping. Slow, mocking applause coming from somewhere above us in the canopy. A man's voice, gravelly and amused. "Outstanding work, Rangers, really professional, especially you, Blackwood." He knew my name. Derek spun in a circle, gun raised, trying to find the source of the voice. "Show yourself. This is a federal law enforcement officer." Laughter echoed from multiple directions. "Federal law enforcement, in my forest, that's rich." "Your forest?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been waiting a long time for the right kind of visitors. Someone who knows what this place really is, what it can do, and someone who's very, very good at using scared little rangers as bait." That's when I understood. We weren't searching for Thalia Morse. We were being hunted. Derek's radio suddenly crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is base. What's your status?" Derek grabbed the radio. "Base, we have a hostile contact." "Requesting immediate backup at—" He looked at his GPS, still showing error messages. "We're approximately 1 mile northwest of Morse's camp, but our navigation equipment is compromised. Someone is—" The radio went dead again. Not just static, complete silence. "He's jamming us," Derek said quietly. "Who? How?" "Military training, electronic warfare. There's devices that can—" A branch snapped behind us. We spun around, but saw nothing. Then another branch to our left, then our right. Something was circling us, but staying just out of sight. "We need to move," Derek whispered. "Back to camp, then back to base. This is way above our pay grade." We started walking back the way we came, but after 10 minutes we found ourselves at Thalia's campsite again. Impossible. We'd been walking in the opposite direction. "We're going in circles," I said. "No," Derek replied, checking his compass again. "According to this, we walked in a straight line south. But somehow—" The campsite was different now. Thalia's neat, organized gear was scattered. Her tent was shredded from the inside like something with claws had tried to get out. And written in the mud in large, uneven letters were the words, "He sees you." Derek keyed his radio again. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Unit 7. We have a code red situation at the Morse campsite. Requesting immediate extraction and backup." Static. Then a voice, but not base dispatch. It was the man from the forest, and somehow he was transmitting on our frequency. "They can't hear you, Rangers. Not anymore. This part of the forest, it doesn't like visitors. But I've learned how to work with it, how to feed it, how to use its hunger." Derek threw the radio down and stomped on it. "Sick freak is playing games with us." But I was looking at something else. Fresh footprints in the mud around the destroyed campsite. Boot prints. Military-style combat boots, size 12 or 13. leading away from camp toward a section of forest I didn't recognize even after 8 years working this park. "Derek, look at this." He examined the prints. Fresh. Maybe an hour old. Heavy tread, expensive boots. This guy's got gear. We followed the boot prints because what else were we going to do? Our radios were dead, our navigation equipment was useless, and the sun was setting fast. In October in Washington, full darkness comes like a curtain dropping. One minute you can see, the next minute you're blind. The prints led us up a ridge I'd never seen before, past rock formations that shouldn't exist in this part of the park. The geology was all wrong. These were sandstone pillars and arches like something from Utah, not the granite and basalt of the Olympics. "This doesn't make sense," I told Derek. "I've been working this area for 8 years. This ridge isn't on any map." Derek was breathing hard from the climb. Maps are wrong sometimes. Could be a surveying error. But we both knew that was bullshit. You don't miss an entire ridge system in a national park. You don't overlook sandstone formations in a volcanic mountain range. That's when we found the cave. It was hidden behind a curtain of moss and ferns, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The boot prints led directly to it and disappeared inside. But there was something else, a smell coming from the cave that made my stomach turn. Sweet and rotten, like meat left in the sun for weeks. Derek drew his flashlight and his sidearm. "Federal Rangers," he called into the cave. "Come out slowly with your hands visible." No response. Just that smell getting stronger. We entered the cave together, Derek leading with his light. The tunnel was narrow at first, then opened into a larger chamber. What we found there, Jesus, I still have nightmares about it. Bodies. Not skeletons. Fresh bodies. Maybe a dozen people all arranged in a circle around what looked like an altar made of stacked stones. The missing hikers from the past 3 years. The ones we'd never found. And in the center, tied to the altar, was the real Thalia Morse. She was alive. Barely. Unconscious, dehydrated, but breathing. Around her neck was a crude necklace made of human teeth. "Oh God," Derek whispered. "We need to get her out of here," and that's when the lights went out. Derek's flashlight, my backup light, everything. Complete darkness. "Welcome to my church, Rangers." The voice came from right behind us. I spun around, couldn't see anything, reached for Derek and found nothing but air. "Derek? Over here." His voice came from the opposite side of the cave. "Enzo, he's got some kind of night vision. He can see us, but we can't." A wet thud. Derek screamed. Then silence. "Derek." Laughter in the darkness. "Your partner is still alive, Blackwood, for now. But whether he stays that way depends on how well you play my game." I fumbled for my backup flashlight, found it, clicked it on. Nothing. Dead battery, even though I'd checked it that morning. "The darkness is my ally," the voice continued. "But it's more than that here. This place, this cave, it's special. The indigenous people knew it. They avoided it. But I embraced it. I learned its secrets." "What do you want?" I called out, trying to pinpoint his location by sound. "I want to show you something beautiful, something most people never get to see. The moment when someone realizes they're completely powerless. When all their training, all their equipment, all their confidence just evaporates." A light suddenly blazed in the cave. Not electric, but something else. a cold, blue-white light that seemed to come from the stones themselves. I could see Derek now, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound near the cave entrance. I could see Thalia, still alive but barely conscious on the altar, and I could see him. He was maybe 45, built like someone who'd spent years in military special forces, camouflage fatigues, tactical vest, night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. But his eyes were the same black void I'd seen in the fake Thalia. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the stone altar. "This place has been hungry for so long." The native tribes fed it occasionally, criminals, enemies, volunteers. But when the white settlers came, they stopped the offerings. The forest got restless. He walked closer to me, and I could see that his tactical vest was decorated with souvenirs. Human fingers dried and preserved, patches of scalp with hair still attached, and hanging from his belt, a collection of ranger badges. I started feeding it again 5 years ago, missing hikers mostly, people no one would look for too hard. But it wanted more. It wanted representatives, people whose disappearance would draw others into the forest. "You're insane," I whispered. "Am I? Watch this." He held up his hand, and the blue light pulsed brighter. The cave walls began to shift and move like they were breathing. The bodies around the altar started to twitch, their eyes opening to reveal the same black void. "The darkness here isn't just absence of light, Blackwood. It's presence of something else." Something that existed before light, before life, before sanity, and it's been so very hungry. The dead bodies began to sit up, their movements jerky and unnatural. They turned their black eyes toward me and began to speak in unison. "Feed us, feed us, feed us." I ran. I left Derek, I left Thalia, I left everything and ran for the cave entrance. Behind me, I could hear the man laughing and the chorus of dead voices chanting. I stumbled out of the cave into full darkness. Somehow hours had passed while we were inside. My training kicked in: find shelter, establish position, call for backup. But when I reached for my radio, I found only empty air. I'd dropped it somewhere in the cave. I started down the ridge, using my hands to feel the way in the darkness. But the ridge was different now. The path we'd climbed up was gone, replaced by sheer rock faces and thorny undergrowth. Then I heard Derek screaming. It came from the direction of the cave, but also from ahead of me, and to my left and to my right. His voice calling my name, begging for help. But I knew it wasn't really Derek. The real Derek was back in that cave, probably dead by now. "Enzo, help me. He's got me. I'm down here." The voices were trying to lead me back, trying to confuse me. I kept moving away from the cave, even when Derek's voice became my wife's voice, then my mother's voice, then the voices of every person I'd ever cared about. "Enzo, why did you leave us? Why didn't you save us?" I stumbled through the forest for hours. The trees seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into new configurations. Paths appeared and disappeared. I'd find myself walking in circles, passing the same fallen log or distinctive rock formation every few minutes. And always, the voices calling to me from the darkness. As dawn finally broke, I found myself at a road I didn't recognize. A highway patrol officer found me there, sitting in the ditch covered in scratches and mud, babbling about caves and dead bodies and men with black eyes. They mounted a search, of course. Brought in teams from 3 different agencies, helicopters, search dogs, the works. They found Thalia's campsite just like we'd left it, but organized and intact, not destroyed. They found no cave, no ridge with sandstone formations, no evidence of Derek or any other person. Derek Sawyer was listed as missing, presumed dead. The official report stated that he'd probably fallen into one of the many deep ravines in the area during a search operation conducted in adverse weather conditions. They put me on administrative leave, then medical leave, then suggested I might be happier in a different line of work. The department psychologist said I was suffering from acute stress reaction, complicated by survivor's guilt and possible head trauma. But I know what I saw. I know what's still out there. I moved to New Mexico 6 months later. Got a job with the state highway department. Open roads, clear sight lines, no trees. My wife thinks I'm afraid of forests now, and I let her believe that. It's easier than explaining that I'm not afraid of forests. I'm afraid of the things that use forests as hunting grounds. Sometimes late at night I get calls on my cell phone. No number shown, just ringing. When I answer, I hear Derek's voice or Thalia's voice or the voices of all those dead hikers calling my name, asking why I left them, asking when I'm coming back. And sometimes when the moon is dark and the desert wind is blowing hard, I can smell that sweet rotten scent from the cave. Even here, 1,000 miles away from Olympic National Park, in the middle of the high desert where nothing can hide. I know he's still out there. The man with the black eyes and the collection of ranger badges. Still feeding the darkness, still drawing people into that impossible cave. And I know that someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 20 years, he's going to come looking for the one who got away, the one who knows his secret. That's why I'm telling this story now. Because if something happens to me, if I disappear, or have an accident, or just vanish from my life here in New Mexico, you'll know why. And maybe someone braver than I was will go looking for that cave and put an end to whatever's sleeping in those stone walls. But if you do, if you're crazy enough to go looking, remember this. Don't trust your equipment. Don't trust your eyes. And for God's sake, don't trust the voices calling your name from the darkness. Because in places like that, in the deep forests where the old things still live, being found is worse than being lost. And sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one you can see coming. It's the one that's been learning to use the darkness itself as a weapon. End of testimony. Enzo Blackwood spoke for approximately 45 minutes, with several emotional breaks. Subject requested that his current location and employment details not be disclosed. Following the interview, Subject provided contact information for Olympic National Park officials and encouraged verification of Derek Sawyer's disappearance in October 2019. Case remains officially unsolved.